Our short talk is on feminist collaboration and resilience in an age of COVID. By way of starting, Sheena and I would like to situate ourselves geographically and genealogically. Sheena and I do the majority of our work in Treaty 6 territory, which is in Alberta, Canada. I had the privilege of moving just 8 years ago. I was born and bred on the other side of the continent in Kanien'kehá:ka and Anishinaabe territory, which is currently known as Montreal, Quebec. I grew up knowing myself as a descendant of Eastern European Jews escaping persecution at the beginning of the 20th century and of early 18th century Acadian settlers, amongst other inheritance lines. I was raised in a society that was steeped in Indigenous erasure and in Franco-Anglo settler infighting. While it's now customary across much of the stolen lands called North America to acknowledge the historical injustices of the settler colonial state, when we make such acknowledgements in events like this, it matters that it not be rehearsed as or even unconsciously normalized into a tokenistic act.
Especially as we talk about climate action and intersectional maternal art and research to create more just futures. It's critical to acknowledge that the lands where we live and work, it's critical to acknowledge the lands where we work and live because climate justice is about the land, right? Our relationships to this planet and one another. As the descendants of settlers who moved away from Europe to North America at different intervals over the last 200 years, I was born in Alberta into a complex web of settler-Indigenous relations marked by historical and ongoing colonialism. Treaty 6 territory, where we speak to you from today, is the traditional home of 48 different Indigenous nations, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. And the city of Edmonton, where we live, is situated on lands long ago stolen from Papaschase and Métis peoples, displacing them through means and methods that led to the loss of culture and lives as part of our nation's history of genocidal practices. The energy and natural resources of these lands, and I should say that here in Alberta, we're at the heartland of the Canadian oil industry. Energy and natural resources have played and continue to play a starring role in colonial genocide and the concomitant ecocide that has led to the climate crisis.
Indeed, a preoccupation with what it means to live and work on these lands and in these times, and with the question of how to grapple differentially with the pasts, presents, and futures, that is, the inheritances, the violences, the privileges, and the possibilities that we embody, is part of what ongoingly brings us together and focuses us on the questions of feminist collaborative praxis. So what might that mean? What might it look like? On consent, conditions of generative refusal that spark our imagination and mobilize us in the present. And resilience, how to nurture adequate conditions for intersectional and multi-species flourishing and affective capacity, especially in these difficult times. So today we thought we'd talk a little bit about what brought us together and say something about how we understand the importance of collaborative method. Our collaboration started in May of 2016 when Sheena and I organized a symposium called Mapping the Maternal, Art, Ethics, and the Anthropocene. The wildfires in in northern Alberta raging, and speculation about the links to climate change on even the mainstream radio and newspapers, Sheena and I spent 4 days co-hosting a group of dynamic feminist scholars who were presenting their research and thinking together at the intersections of gender, maternal care ethics, and intersectional climate justice. In organizing this event, we were particularly attentive not only to its content, inviting a cross-section of scholars and artists speaking to the maternal from a complex overlapping set of perspectives, including Indigenous kinship relations, critical disability studies, and anti-reproductive perspectives, but also the form of the event. How, through specific material structures and temporal organization, we might better nurture conditions for robust and generative exchange across disciplinary and sometimes ideological differences. We did this by attending not only to who was invited to participate, but how including making arrangements for various modes of accessibility and comfort in the space, childcare for those traveling with children or funds for childcare for those leaving them at home, to other details of event organization, such as the amount of time to allow between programmed sessions, how much downtime to give people, the availability of a variety of food and drink in comfortable corners to facilitate unexpected connections and encounters with other participants, amongst other aesthetic considerations. The point of all of this was, against the university givens in which Sheena and I work, to assert the constitutive power of form in shaping the content of our exchanges, something that we've all been forced to contend with in new ways in an age of Zoom and other digital platforms. So rather than being just a backdrop, the disco womb-like structure of Danish artist Lisa Hallerbageson's Modernism installation created an intimate space where we work intensely to rally our shared feminist maternal theorizing around issues of art, storytelling, and climate change, exploring the possibilities that arise if we take seriously a feminist ethics of care in the mode that feminist philosopher Maria Puig de Bellacasa calls for in her 2017 book, Matters of Care, Speculative Ethics for a More Than Human World, in which she reroutes Bruno Latour's conception of matters of concern towards a relational care ethics that both de-genders care and decentralizes the ideology of human autonomy in the care circuit. We understand this as central to our feminist methodology.
The work that we began together that fateful May, our first time working with each other, led to a new and exciting project called Speculative Energy Futures. Speculative Energy Futures works to cultivate a deep and true interdisciplinary engagement between academic and artist researchers and scientists and policy experts over the course of 6 years, together producing other forms of creative and scholarly collaborative publication, aiming to center just energy transition in our daily art and activism in ways that work to impact policy at both the municipal and international levels. There is a redistribution of power occurring right now in our country, our province, and our university as a result of larger geopolitical forces emerging from a transition away from fossil fuels as a first necessary response to the ecological imperative to decarbonize. And it is this junction, relationality at the heart of maternal ethics as we understand it, and the relational situated perspectives at the heart of climate justice action, and how these come together at this historical moment we struggled through at the symposium in 2016. There we featured a film called Petromama, Mothering in a Crude World that I had recently made, informed by my years of work on human rights and women's rights, which I suddenly saw playing out in new ways as a mother of 2 young children suffering climate-induced asthma. Petromama explores the distress of a mother, so me, rushing her sick preschooler to the doctor against the backdrop of congested traffic in an oil refinery community. Not scientifically proven, at least not yet, the doctor nonchalantly referred to the forest fires burning around us as the cause of respiratory problems in many of his patients. He named what we could all feel in our bodies. The toxicity of this time is changing the landscape of our lives, even at the cellular level. I created Petromama to invite more feminist maternal thinkers into the conversation around climate crisis, which before the Paris Agreement of 2015 and the IPCC report of 2018 telling us we had then 12 years to act, these were not as central to public discussion as they have become over the last few years.
So at the same time, in different corners of the university, Sheena and I were both producing research creationally informed media works, dealing with the maternal as both an ethics and a politics. While Sheena was developing Petromama, I was working on twinned projects called New Maternalisms and Maternal Ecologies. I won't go into these in too much detail, except to say that they were artistic research projects organized at the intersection of feminist politics and performance art. It emerged from my need to find ways of understanding my daily experience as an artist, theorist, mother, working in the academy, who found herself both unwilling and unable to separate her status as mother from her status as artist and academic at a time when there were vastly fewer of us talking about, let alone working on topics such as these. So it's this connection through the feminist maternal that instigated Sheena and my collaborative path. For both of us, the research, however, was never just about the maternal. but rather the Maternal was a situated, potent, an urgent site for interrogating our local conditions of labor, of affect, as feminists, as mothers, as scholars, and as artists. All of our work comes back to this, how we politicize and render each other capacious and capable, to draw on the work of feminist philosopher Isabel Stengers, in our knowledge making and in our knowledge sharing practices. So how we negotiate the production on the ground of more livable and just worlds. And at this historic moment, the inescapable context for this work is one of both COVID and ecological uncertainty for ourselves, children, and our children's children. No one knows what will hit next, or how quickly climate disasters will accelerate, or whether we're now in for a whole cascade of pandemics. We certainly hope not. This period has been hard. It is hard. And while Sheena and I have been working together for about 6 years now, co-leading projects and giving shared talks such as this one, we also live next door to each other. I moved to be next to her 16 months ago. And to varying degrees, we co-parent, and co-live, and co-dream, and sometimes we co-vent and co-drink and co-cry. And up until recently, under COVID, we did what our Chief Medical Officer of Alberta, Dr. Dina Hinshaw, dubbed cohort. The vast majority of the pandemic to date, we were fortunate to be able to cohort isolate. Affect and theory, politics and labor, work, art, and life, all intersecting, bursting into each other's territory, and pushing us off kilter, out of orbit, and disorienting us on a regular basis. Indeed, collaboration is not for the faint of heart. Sometimes Sheena and I disagree and pull in different directions. Sometimes we think we're headed in the same direction, but then one of us darts in a different way. These are the perils of genuine collaboration, as I'm sure most of you here can empathize with, given the collaborative and interdisciplinary nature of many of the practices of those on this panel. But these are also its joys. For collaboration, and its emergent dynamism, pulls us out of the isolating neoliberal subjectivity that is, despite critique and resistance, constitutive of the dominant modes that govern much of our labor as academics and artists.
Indeed, COVID is deepening social isolation and weakening temporarily, if not permanently fracturing many community ties. Political interests are exploiting this moment to push through policies that will yet further erode job security and the social fabric of our societies. Whether it is these politics of alienation, or rampant forest fires, or other extreme weather events, or COVID, these are the aspects of the new normal that fill us with horror and objection. But we are also very grateful for the resilience created at the micro level of the everyday, and the political resilience at the community scale, or even the larger political scale, that can be created through collaborative encounters and relationships that leave us working in less, not more, alienation. Being involved in feminist collaborative praxis, artistic and community engaged, as not only the subject of work, but the process of being and doing in the world is what makes us resilient to the blows we are subjected to over the long term. But how does one do collaboration under COVID, when the very presence of the pandemic demands isolation to slow the curve, and when the powers that be, those who've gotten to where they are by mobilizing the very antithesis of collaborative care praxis, are using COVID to shape the future to their benefit and profit? There are ways, by forging accomplice relationships between feminists focused on a range of political issues that aim to decolonize, in multiple forms that include unsettling and queering, ultimately transforming our immediate spheres of influence, our institutions, public life, or even global policy, which is the ambitious aim of Natalie and my current collaborative project, Speculative Energy Futures. This happens one day at a time. Collaborations are hard and they take work, but they function as sites of resistance because the work of collaboration is different from what the neoliberal imperatives are asking of us. Living through this moment of climate change crisis, living on a dying planet, living and always dying simultaneously, is about being able to remake ourselves in a world in which historical progress is no longer the yardstick by which we can speculate about the future, and in which we can no longer rely on the most recent historical models of doing. When we can't rely on what was, or what is, or what will be, we can at least rely on one another. Create more livable lives in the present in the hopes that this will lead to more livable futures, without, of course, being so arrogant as to imagine that we can save the planet or ourselves. This is what Donna Haraway famously calls staying with the trouble, and it is something that we work to do wherever we are, however we can. You may think that I'm speaking my words and Natalie hers, but all of these words exist in a strange in-between place. Some mine, some hers, some ours, and it isn't always obvious which one of us is speaking what. And of course, all of our thinking exists in our wider networks of situated knowledge making and kinship relations within our communities of living and knowing. And it is precisely this collaborative, this articulation, one that we link to the relational enmeshment at the heart of the feminist maternal, that we ongoingly endeavor to perform. We do so in the context of COVID, which has rendered acute what those of us working on climate-related issues in the academy have long known. The neoliberal reproductive logics of the university must change. Feminist collaboration in life, in art, and in the academy is therefore our chosen mode of resilience. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will talk to you about a project called Climate Change Theater Action, which I co-started with some colleagues of mine in 2015. And of course, the question is if we can, if caring is associated with maternal instincts, how can we harness those maternal instincts in service of the earth? So Climate Change Theater Action, what it is a worldwide series of readings and performances of short plays about an aspect of climate change that are presented within a certain time window that is in the fall to coincide with the United Nations COP meetings. And these presentations, these happen every other year. So we started in 2015. Last one was in 2019. Next one will be in 2021. So every time there are 50 playwrights from around the world, we make sure that every continent is represented, that are commissioned to write a 5-minute play about an aspect of climate change based on a prompt. Then we take this collection of plays and we made them available to organizers anywhere in the world who would like to present an event in their communities. And these organizers can just sign up with us. They express their interest. It doesn't matter. We don't put any limits on what this event needs to be. It can be very small. Sometimes professors will read plays in a class. Sometimes they will be a fully mounted production on a stage in a theater or university. People have done a lot of things outside. It's really opened, and it's also meant to be available to a wide range of resources. Whether you have no resource or a lot, you can design your event to fit those resources. In 2019, which is the last time we did the event, we gave the prompt that we gave was lighting the way. So, and we give a prompt to help orient the writers a little bit, and also to stay away from a lot of apocalyptic scenarios or depiction of dystopian worlds, which tends to be the easiest first place writers go if they're not used to dealing with the subject. So we say to them, here's a prompt, here's a thing to help guide, to give you inspiration. You can interpret it however you want, but we're hoping that it guides towards a slightly more positive place, and it doesn't become just about repeating the headlines. So lighting the way, what we told the writers was this year we want to give center stage to the unsung climate warriors and climate heroes who are lighting the way towards a just and sustainable future. These might be individuals or communities fighting for justice or inventing new technologies. They may be animals, plants, or spirits imparting wisdom, or they may be a part of yourself you didn't know was there. Feel free to be literal or not, and to travel forward or backward in time. And just to give you an example of the stories we got, some of the plays were about new technologies. For example, shoes made of mango leather. retelling old myths and stories that incorporate climate change, what it means to be a hero, coming together as a community, giving legal rights to nature, and standing up to big corporations. So where do these events take place? I've told you a little bit, but here's a list. In theaters, all kinds of schools, outside, in parks, street corners, backyards, cafes, bars, more non-traditional places like libraries, churches, yoga studios, places like that. Some of my favorites were two that I noted here at the foot of glaciers. This was an event that took place in Alaska. And in kayaks, this was an event recently that took place in Florida. Also, sometimes it's not live, it's radios and podcasts. Actions. So I forgot to mention, we invite people to use the place to organize an event, and then we ask them to include an action as part of their events. And by action, we mean something that goes beyond just the artistic presentation, and that either bring people together who would normally not encounter together, or that help people, audiences, take a step towards being more engaged with the earth and everything that populates the earth, and try to leave something positive. So here are some examples of actions that have been taken: donations, letters, marches and pledges, presentations, local resources, a lot of tabling by environmental organizations and things like that. To give you a sense of the scope, so our last climate change theater action was in 2019. There were over 200 events presented in 28 countries. Because we're based in the US and it's such a mess at the moment, we were trying really hard to have 50 US states represented to be able to make a statement and saying we can be united on this issue. And then 3,000 participants, those are the people who either organized the event or acted in it, and we reached 26,000 audience members around the world. And also to give you, I'm going to stop here, but I have a short video. It's about 60 seconds long that I would like to play for you. And the video is made of footage from events from all over that we put together to give a sense to people of what this project looks like. If you want more information, the link was there on the last image, climatechangetheateraction.com.
I'm representing Liberate Tate, and Liberate Tate is an art collective making performance interventions in Tate spaces until Tate drops its oil company funding, namely BP. So without permission from the institution, from 2010, we made dozens of live art performances to activate spaces at Tate. In 2016, Tate said it would no longer take sponsorship from BP. It only ever received a very small amount in the first place. BP got much more out of this relationship than Tate did. This evening I'm going to talk about Birthmark, the final piece we made for Tate, but the one that's bridged the period from BP sponsorship to non-BP sponsorship and continues to be performed with and without Liberate Tate around the world. Birthmark explores lasting damage, scarring and healing through the medium of tattoo giving. Numbers are written on the body, brands are written on the gallery, and as carbon is released into the atmosphere, damage is written on the planet. My birthmark is 333, and showing it to you on the video screen. And I was born in 1977. If you were born in 1977 too, we'd share this number. So as with all Liberate Tate's work, this piece was unsanctioned and in defiance of BP sponsorship. 4 of us learned to give tattoos, and in 2015 we first performed the piece in the BP Walk Through British Art in the 1840s gallery at Tate, Britain. 1840 was the decade that the Industrial Revolution sent carbon emissions through the roof. We snuck in car batteries and inverters to power our tattoo machines. We carried on our own hot water in flasks and bowls and pitchers. 2 other artists ritualized the repetitive act of hand washing and poured water and soap so we could surgically scrub between each tattoo. And this has set us up incredibly well for the current pandemic, by the way. In 2016, after Tate had dropped BP, we performed the piece at the National Portrait Gallery, also without invitation, on the threshold of the BP Portrait Award. And since 2016, with invitation, we've performed the piece in galleries and domestic spaces in the UK and the US and Australia. In addition, welcomed by Liberate Tate, separate groups of artists have performed Birthmark all over the world. They don't need permission for us to do this. Anyone can do it. Sometimes artists have given each other stick and poke tattoos. Sometimes people have taken our template into salons and expanded the project to include their own children. You can see here that Jenny has put her children's birthmarks underneath her own and says that she's added the CO2 levels of her children's birth years because they're more important to her than she is now. We have no idea how many people have the birthmark today. In response to climate change, this performance embodies the revisions being inscribed on our planet in an intimate, personal way. Being born in the same year has a new meaning now. Living through the same increase in carbon dioxide, each tattoo echoes the engraving act by the oil sponsor in transforming the body of the gallery. A key part of the performance is a conversation about the tattoo receiver's journey to the moment of this marking today. How did you begin to take action on climate, we ask? What was your personal process to seek social change to protect the planet? Birthmark was conceived whilst holding a great black square of fabric in 2013. I was pregnant then. Chalilin Malevich, while his retrospective was showing at Tate Modern. The piece was called Hidden Figures, referring to the fee given to Tate from BP that they wanted kept secret because it wasn't very much money. A new family stood in the middle of the turbine hall and were the first players in the performance. The 8x8 metre black square had been smuggled past bag checks in their pram. The piece reflected the participatory, family-friendly nature of the performance, which was hard to keep children away from. All through this whole phase of Liberate Tate's work, we were renegotiating a working practice as a collective. We reshaped how and where we met to make work to fit around a new mother, and around that time we welcomed in a few other new mothers to the collective, and our practice evolved around that. And the children influenced the work. Many of us got black square tattoos to mark our commitment to Liberate Tate from BP. And then later on, Birthmark was born while we watched our small children crawling in the grass on our creative retreat. And we decided that we needed to be giving each other these climate tattoos. I got to wondering how we could do that and this. But through this maternal lens, we could reimagine all kinds of things, and we went about learning to tattoo. We learned to tattoo ourselves. 4 of us learned together, all women, forming a kind of coven for the project. Two of us were nursing mothers and therefore unable to receive tattoos, and only one of us had ever had a tattoo, and she held our collective curated practice on her skin, a maternal act if ever there was. That's her thigh. Those are the marks we made there. It was like learning to write all over again. We learned to meditate together to teach our lines to be steady. We held our nerve, we held each other. We marked bananas and pomegranates. We were there, we were each other's mothers, and we made all our practicing on the dark womb-like boats where we lived. And we learned that we can only do this together. And as we learned our craft, our babies were held on other boats by our mothers, thankfully too engrossed in looking after their grandchildren to wonder what we were doing. Sometimes we would go to a house to work, and then sometimes other people from our collective would help with the babies. Those children are nearly 6 years old today, and they and the newer babies have often been present in our studio and performance spaces. The collective is not all women, but it is entirely maternal and loving and women-led. It's the familial side of our group that makes it work, and we know that we can only do these things together. Thanks so much for listening. And just to end on what's happening at Tate today and where the creativity is going. So just to say that I love Tate. I've been going there since I was a kid. This is all about love for Tate. But it's worth noting that one of Liberate Tate's origins is that the collective was founded during a commissioned Tate workshop in 2010, on art and activism. And at the last minute, Tate curators tried to censor the workshop from making interventions against Tate sponsors, even though none had actually been planned. And it was from that fertile antagonism that sprang Liberate Tate. Tate are unofficially citing this moment as one reason they can't risk working with the artist Jade Montserrat today, even though they commissioned her to co-curate a year-long programme at Tate Exchange with Amy Sharrock's. Jade blew the whistle on collector Anthony Doffey's racist doll selfie he sent to her, just part of a long history of abuse. And since then, more issues have come to light and Tate have cut ties with him. But they have also called Jade Montserrat hostile, and by refusing to work with her are choosing to censor her work as a Black woman artist. And as We Industria puts it, an institution choosing to censor and harm artists in order to prioritise their relationships with donors is unacceptable. So if you want to read more about that, or to sign on to the open letter protesting Tate's censorship of a Black woman artist, go to We Industria's Instagram or read the latest copy of Art Monthly. Thank you so much for listening.
I'm digitally coming to you from Nelson, BC in Canada, which is located on the unceded territories of the Sinixt Arrow Lakes and Yakanuki Lower Kootenai Band peoples. This region holds 5 generations of families' experiences as settlers, and that includes assaying, mining, bridge dam building, farming, restaurant touring, teaching, postal working, nursing, and other creative outputs in the rural and urban centers in this Columbia Basin area. My research delves into some of this history from a place of curiosity. I am engaged in a history through the landscape, co-composing with objects, matter extraction and surveillance technologies, and site-specific engagements along the Columbia Basin and beyond. In particular, I am interested in the celebration between the unconscious, the conscious, and the vulnerable spaces of the in-between, between art, performance, and life, and how these overlap. Let's just jump back there. My work connects to memory, water, air, mountains, systems, bodies, and place, and critically engages with the political, sociological, and theoretical foundations and materiality through a feminist research creation lens. For my presentation, again, I would like to remind everybody about the provocations that we had. How might a maternal inclination help us to reimagine the future? And what maternal futures might we want to create? I will now show you 3 excerpts that take up the notions of feminist collaboration, care and maternal ecologies. These pieces were all collaboratively made and shot between multiple pregnancies, miscarriages, other types of deaths along the raging waterways in Squamish, BC, inside my living room with two other mothered bodies, and along the canal flat with my partner and my two young children the night before the first snowfall. Weather balloons are high altitude objects. They send information about our atmosphere, temperature, and speed. Here, I engage the balloon in a maternal, uncanny duet. This piece was filmed after I first experienced my first miscarriage, and also after my grandmother's passing. These moments and experiences have not been excluded in my creative approach. I see bodies as spaces of enmeshment, folded in a transcorporeal dance, which is complex, full of politics, surroundings, and substances that often merge and become blurred, in which a variety of time, frames, and realities blend together. This piece is a speculative forecast of a time in which algorithms demarcate boundaries between the biological, mothered bodies, and bacteria, illuminating background between the non-human and human. And the last work I'd like to show you is a piece that I just finished called Feminist Bodies in a Post-Human Mountain Imaginary. This piece is about a female form that is exploring the landscape and creating new systems that extend our gaze and perception beyond. Here, I hold the remains of a tree in an expansive meadow with long grass, weathered trees, and hidden waterways. The snippet highlights the processes of care and interactions of trying not to disturb the landscape, which has already been disturbed, and the active caring and helping the remains of a tree to find a space to co-become. This approach considers the ethics of care and more than human shared spaces of temporality, and how it is integral to move away from prescriptive viewpoints and instead take up a mutual responsibility for our shared ecological communities. Thank you. So circling back, what I'm articulating here is a feminist approach to research creation and stewardship that invokes a multiplicity of meanings and narrations toward emergent ecological possibilities and futures. Indeed, notions of the maternal go beyond gender, beyond our bodies, beyond this moment, and remind me that we are material, feeling bodies that perceive and collect information, vibrations. We all are always in the process of remediating, responding, negotiating, and making connections through our limbs, our eyes, our ears, our skin, our cells, and beyond. So thank you.
I'm a choreographer. I make work often for outdoor sites where the general public stumble across the work. I seek out contexts that reach audiences with a real range of age and socio-economic backgrounds. I work with all ages and experiences with big casts. And tonight I'm just going to focus on all female casts in the presentation. I don't and I can't make issue-based work, but I do have a very strong desire to help people perceive the environment around them anew and to deepen their felt sense of themselves in relationship to it, both the dancers and the audience. In sensing our bodies and our presence in relation to our environment, I'm hoping that I can enliven the sense that we are nature, and that our skin dissolves into air and air dissolves into our skin. This is what you're seeing here is one section of square dances in 2011, where I wanted to flood the public space with women like a flock of visiting birds who breathed and sensed their surroundings keenly together, illustrating a wildness, a collective mind, abandonment and listening, acceptance of old and young bodies and approaches. I wanted to highlight individuality, but within a strong community of unspoken acceptance. They're all daughters, some of them mothers, some of them grandmothers, and they're all creatures and behaving like them in a very urban world. But I'd like to focus a little more tonight on Passage for Par, 2018, I think it was. So there are 30 women aged 19 to 60 plus there, and over 2 hours they crossed the sand out to the shoreline and back at the turn of the tide on 3 days. And these are shots of the rehearsals and then the performance. The sight drew me to consider time, meandering time, tide time, day and night time, dusk and dawn time. I wanted to knit and weave the women into the landscape, their bodies stitching together the land and the sky for the viewers. I thought about labor and all its meanings. They behave as one organism. They have to surrender to it, and they learn through working together to find out how it works, this massive organism that actually is incredibly difficult to perform. And they discover its nature collectively. I hope it perhaps speaks of endurance, one foot in front of the other, on and on, women's work and women's strength. I conceived of the work during the time I was the primary carer for my mother as she slowly left the earth over 2 years. She died 8 weeks before the intensive rehearsal period began. I realize in hindsight that the steady endurance, the listening and responding, being attentive to every detail of each other along the line and of the landscape, is reminiscent of that caring daily work. Making the work reminded me of the time it takes to know anything well, the time mothering and caring takes, the time it takes to be part of the world around you and to be attentive to it. The women in their passage created a new attentiveness in the viewer, I hope. Perhaps they would notice time and space more keenly, because the passage of the women's movement graphically pointed to it somehow. I hoped that they would be intrigued by the democracy of the organism, the purpose and seeming purposelessness of their journey, thus helping them to just be on the beach, to be with the performance, to settle into being with. Perhaps that being with state is actually a maternal state. I believe we've got to continually fight for the raised status of different ways of knowing the world, indigenous ways of knowing, often seen as female ways of knowing, and that we need to trust and respect our bodies and their innate knowing and intelligence in order to move towards a healthier relationship with our own natures in the natural world. In pondering on your question to us, I thought parenting isn't extractive. It's about nurturing and letting something be. It's about building skills and capacity for love, awareness, understanding, sensitivity. It's about adding value, not extracting value. If we lived in a world where the principle to add value rather than take it away, just think what that could be like. If the maternal instinct or inclination, as you say, is about care or love, I can hardly separate the two, then love at its best is unconditional. So is the maternal approach then about nurturing to allow a new being to be itself, the best of itself? And I'd like to end with saying that the word wildness, its translation actually means being itself. I think it comes from the Chinese, and a wild landscape is self-willed. So it is actually self-ablazement. So perhaps the maternal instinct is to allow the earth and us to be ourselves. I think we can end there and on that slide. Thank you so much.
Just a note on the video that I'm going to share. It's not directly related to what I'm going to say. It's a raw video from 2017. It's unedited audiovisual data from a new kind of theater laboratory. Gender, parenting were not the main focus of the project that's documented here, but they can, of course, be found in the project's archive. And in this video, it's going to be played. You see myself, you see my colleague Eda Ercin, and you also see my mother, Lane Spatz. See, that's my mother there, Lane Spatz, who's a visual artist who was in our studio laboratory on that day. The video was recorded by Agnieszka Mendel, and you can also see at one point photographer Gary Cook there in the studio with us. So I'm not sure that the juxtaposition is not direct, but I think there may be resonances. Alongside the video, I'm just going to read a short essay poem that I wrote thinking about the themes that were raised today. The questions that came before this panel. It's called Non-Binary Maternal, an Essay Poem. 1. As a non-binary parent, recently separated, looking for ways to escape being merely their father, and to rediscover myself as a parent, I accept, at least for now, that my children call me dad. Perhaps I could describe myself as a maternal dad, certainly not paternal, with those implications of distance. Or perhaps there is another word that I haven't found just yet. Anyway, the word dad makes me think of the phrase dad bod, which I like. It suggests how a body of any gender may be transformed by the practice of parenting. I will come back to that. 2. I have to say that binary gendered terms are always complex for me. I have to speak both for and against the maternal. I have to mention how the figure of the mother can be deployed in violent ways, especially when it is linked to whiteness. I'm thinking of how an internet forum in the UK grew into a significant national voice of transphobia by developing a particular notion of the maternal. And right now, of course, the figure of the maternal is being deployed as part of a strategy to capture another seat on the US Supreme Court for white supremacy. It's the gender binary itself that shores up a hidden whiteness in the moment that mother actually codes for white. If motherhood and the maternal are not to enact such violence, then we must look beyond whiteness and beyond the gender binary. 3. This past summer, as lockdown deepened, I was looking for new models of the kind of parent that I would like to be. I spoke to some friends, I listened to some talks, I read some books. Kim Tallbear, in a talk on making love and relations beyond settler sexualities, speaks of a form of mothering that she translates as caretaking, in which she sees as detachable from the cisgender, biologically reproductive woman's body. Alexis Pauline Gumbs, in a book called Revolutionary Mothering, asks what would it mean for us to take the word mother less as a gendered identity and more as a possible action, a technology of transformation that those people who do the most mothering labor are teaching us right now. For so many years we have spoken about gender and sexuality. Now, as a queer parent, I am thinking that all along we should have been speaking about gender, sexuality, and parenting. 4. So, is there a non-binary maternal? I have a brilliant doctoral student named Sophie Fedokaki, who is also working on the concept of care. And I wonder, is the maternal just care, or is it a specific kind of care? Not reducible to pregnancy or childbirth, of course, not reducible to any kind of sexed embodiment. But perhaps it is about embodied care. Care with the body, bodily care, care that risks one's own body, care that opens and sensitizes the body, care through proximity rather than distance, care through touch, closeness, opening, vulnerability, and softness. When you open your body, when you put your body into risk, into softness, in order to care for someone else, perhaps we could think of that as a possible future for a non-binary maternal.